Hey guys, welcome to Vancouver Real Estate Today. I'm Realtor Josh Kepke, and today I'm sitting here with James Bligh, architect at Proscenium, and he is also published in Canadian Architect, contributes to the Price Tags blog, and he received honorable mention in the Missing Middle competition, which is where I met him on the tour for that. So thanks for taking some time, and welcome to the show, James.
So here's the thing, homeowners, homebuyers, investors, we all want to find that perfect property to move into and to eventually sell for a profit. And we want to make that purchase in a place with affordable, safe, quality homes, communities, and businesses. Why? So we can actually enjoy our lives, take vacations, and spend the quality time we want with the people we love. How do we do all this without risking a fortune and running ourselves ragged? That's the big question, and this show is dedicated to the answer.
So tell us about the Missing Middle competition, because you're the architect. This is your domain. Why don't you just get us started?
Get you started? Sure, yeah. So, I should first mention that I received a special mention instead of an honorable mention. It's very similar. But just in case, because they did also, for some reason, they had two kinds of mentions. So I'm special. I'm special.
And you didn't just say that to me just before we hit record,
no,
too.
No, definitely not. But let me tell you about the competition.
Please.
So the competition came out of the wake of Vancouver's housing crisis, at the peak of the crisis a few years ago, where it was extremely difficult for people entering the market to find housing. Mm-hmm. And the Urbanarium, which is this organization that was started by a group of members of the industry, of the construction and real estate development and architecture industries. They made this advocacy group, and the group had existed for some time, but in the wake of the crisis, they decided that they should do something to respond. And they came up with a competition aimed at tackling the housing crisis, and they called it the Missing Middle. They called it the Missing Middle. Now, I should state that I'm not with the Urbanarium, so I'm really only interpreting their platform.
Yeah.
But my take on their platform is that they wanted, how should I put it? They wanted to look at mid-rise housing, and because they felt that Vancouver has a lot of low-rise housing and high-rise housing and not a lot of middle-rise housing, and they thought that perhaps by looking at mid-rise housing, we could introduce it into low-rise neighborhoods.
Sort of gentle density.
Gently increasing the density and using the supply of that density afforded by the fact that it's taller than, say, single-family housing to contribute to more affordable options. And they didn't limit themselves to just saying that it's the density, it's not just the scale of the building that's important, but they also encouraged entrants to find other ways of increasing the affordability as well. And as it turns out, the winners did all three. The winners had a mid-rise design. It fit very snugly into a single-family neighborhood. In fact, if you looked at the renderings, it was almost difficult to tell that it was any different. Right. But then they also leveraged a form of co-housing to not only make it like a supply chain solution, but also a delivery, a difference in the way that housing is delivered. We want a special mention, not for the way that the winners did, the winners having the co-housing option, but we tried to revise how the rezoning process is done.
Right. And let's be clear that this was a design competition. Nobody built anything for this. I think I didn't actually do any research before I showed up for the tour, and I went, oh, it's the renderings we're looking at. Okay.
That's right. Yeah, there were no built projects as a result. The Urbanarium, I don't think, has the budget to fund a prototype. Yeah. And even if they did, they would have to first own land, which is, the most expensive part of real estate. So I don't think it was ever in the cards to build something, but I think what they were trying to do is they were trying to inspire local developers to build something that is more affordable. And they were hoping that, and this is me inferring from the
Sure,
competition,
of
that
course.
something in there would be a seed of an idea that could hopefully get repeated, kind of like the Vancouver Special
Yeah.
started as an idea about kind of abusing the planning policies to get as much density as possible,
Yeah.
and that became an affordable housing solution. And for them to now say, okay, well, what other kind of ways can we adjust the system or work with the system, build within it to find an affordable option? So that's kind of the crux of the competition. As you may recall from your walking tour, I had some criticisms of the debate.
I thought you brought a soapbox with you,
Yeah,
right?
I did. I brought a soapbox. Yeah, I stood up on it, and I'm happy to walk you through it again for the podcast.
Please, yeah. And just so a little more context, what I remember is they kind of gave the competition entrances saying, here's an area, pick some lots in it to do something creative with. It wasn't, those were kind of the parameters. And where were we? We were in Surrey.
We were in Surrey, yeah.
And we were in Burnaby,
Yeah.
in Vancouver
Yeah.
Special Land. And it was, here's a couple standard lots, standard house, and
Yeah.
go nuts.
What they did was they took 4 different neighborhoods, 4 different single-family neighborhoods, and randomly allocated each entrant one of the sites,
Okay.
so that about a quarter of each of the entrants had each site.
So you didn't pick your site. They
No,
picked an actual lot for you,
no.
parcel.
As someone from North Van, I would have never picked Surrey, but but we were given Surrey, and there was this opportunity for us to go to Surrey, and you know, I don't. Being from the North Shore, there's not a lot of reasons to go there. So
Yeah.
we got to discover suburbia. I got to my partners Ian and Simon. We got to discover Surrey suburbia, which is similar but different. More similar to North Van than perhaps I had thought growing up as a you know, a privileged white kid.
Yeah.
And,
Both of us.
Yeah. But in retrospect, it's I think a lot of the suburban conditions in the metro area have a lot in common and are going to share and continue to share the affordability issues. So in that regard, it kind of didn't matter which neighborhood we were given. In fact, our approach, as with the approach of many of the entrants, I felt, was not necessarily as site-specific as you might think. You know, a lot of them had, you know, kind of a pitched roof, mid-rise form that snugly fit into a pitched roof single-family neighborhood, which could be used to describe any of the 4 locations.
Very similar.
Right?
So let's get into what you were
soapbox?
saying on the side of the road there.
Yeah. My criticism of the competition, which I hope won't get me in too much trouble, but I would say that I had some of the criticisms are they're not necessarily that fair. You know, like one of the first criticism I had was in the name of the competition, the missing middle, because I felt that the name of the competition suggested that there was a shape or a density, a mass that would solve the crisis. You know, it's the missing middle. So does that mean that, you know, if we build middle density size housing, that will solve our affordability?
It's our magic bullet.
Is it the magic bullet?
No.
Frankly, I don't think so.
Yeah.
You know, I see the housing situation, and I'm concerned that the problem is related to how much of the housing stock is privately owned and sold, and how little of it is government subsidized or government owned. And because of that, the crux of my argument is that these private homes are being bought and sold as commodities, which means that they have value that goes beyond their basic value as a human right, and extends into appreciation. And you know, like I believe you even mentioned it in your own intro to your podcast about how the goal of every Vancouver homeowner is to allow their home to increase in value, to appreciate, and then to sell it at a profit.
It is,
you know,
yeah.
is that really our goal? You know,
It is.
like, and no, it's true, like in the sense that like it's the vast majority of Vancouverites and people across the globe, you know.
And if you
are
want to
thinking
tell me
about
it's
that.
not worth $2 million, you're wrong.
That's right, yeah, you know. So it's troublesome for me because now that I've been in the industry a little bit, I'm starting to see how the salami is made, so to speak. And I see people suggesting solutions to the housing crisis that are supply related. And my criticism to the supply idea is that, let's just say theoretically that we were to densify the whole metro area, 1.0 FAR everywhere.
Blanket rezone.
Blanket, across.
That Gordon Brice says we'll never do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Let's think about what happens then.
That was the Hector Bremner platform.
Yeah, I know. I was against that platform, but I'll tell you what I think happens in that case, that solution, right? So we get all this additional density, and let's just say miraculously there's enough construction workers out there to build it up, and that notwithstanding that issue, that there's an increase in supply, and what do you know? Prices go down. So, did that work? Well, it looks like it worked, but let's say you give it another 20 years, 30 years, migration continues, people move into the area, people have more families, and all of a sudden, the ratio of people to housing is the same as it was now.
Sounds like driving the argument for
like,
bigger roads.
That's
the
right.
Traffic will just come.
It's like solving obesity by loosening your belt. It's not really a long-term solution. And so
well put.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have to credit my old professor George Baird for that one. But that's I love that line. So in any case, if that is not the solution, because again, it's not a long-term solution, it's a short-term solution, then what is the solution? How is there a way that we can decouple the cost of land from the cost of having a home? And do we need to own our home? And does our home need to be our investment?
Our nest egg.
Our nest egg, thank you. And so maybe I'll tell you firstly about the solution that we submitted for the competition, and then afterwards I'll tell you a little bit more about my criticism of the crisis. So our entry, whereas most of the entries were a form of co-housing, and I do think that there is a avenue for co-housing, and that co-housing can help with certain demographics in affording housing that they may not otherwise be able to afford, or have certain amenities, or be local to certain amenities, that it's not a catch-all solution. It's going to help some people. And when we were looking at it, we were saying to ourselves, what is it about the current system? If we were to operate in the current system only, and not to say that the government's going to come in and just do it all now, like a communist socialist thing that, what could we do in a capitalist city? And our solution was to change the way rezoning is done. Because rezoning is kind of like it's the method by which you take a piece of property and increase its density.
You make a lot of money.
And you make a lot of money, right? And so we were saying, this is where the monetary windfalls are happening. This is where the cost of land is skyrocketing. And why is that? And one of the things we realized was that, as the developer rezones, they're sitting on all of this value that they've created for themselves, and that then they can turn around and sell it for a massive profit. And even though the city requests one-time fees to recoup the cost that the density has brought to the city, it never is fully accurate in its ability to predict how much value the development has brought. So maybe a good example would be Woodward's. It's such a tall building in a low-rise neighborhood. And not only did that project increase its own value, but it increased the value of the neighboring properties as well, right? And so what we proposed was that if you wanted to rezone, then you would have to enter an agreement with the city. And the agreement would be that the city would get to keep shares of the land. Some fraction undetermined. But to make things simple, let's say that you rezone, and the person who rezones gets to keep a fraction of the land equal to the density that they had before they rezoned, and the city gets the rest. And that sounds pretty nasty.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, you've got all of these units, and if they all sell, then the developer still gets a cut from each one of those properties.
They're builders, they're not speculators in this case.
That's right, they're builders.
Yeah.
And so they can make a more defined, smaller, more reliable cut. And there's different ways of kind of doing it to make it more reliable, because that's kind of what you want to do for the developer. Is if you want to say, okay, there's less risk, there's less money, but it's guaranteed.
Right.
And I think there are developers out there that would take that deal. And then the other benefit is a good PR benefit, because then they're not the evil developer, increasing the cost of housing and making these huge monetary windfalls. They're now just like a builder.
So what does the city do with their share?
That would have been a good question for Gordon Price.
Yeah. You can comment, Gordon, if you're watching. Comment below.
Yeah. There's a couple of levies that the city draws on for different reasons. So I know that one of them is for services like water and sewer and roads, stuff that you can expect. And then there's another one for amenities, which is to say that you've got all this additional density in the city, so now we need money for amenities for all these people. But those are the values that the city wants to pull out the day that the rezoning is issued, practically.
So when do they get them out in your scenario?
In my scenario, they don't get it right away. They get it when the land is sold in the future.
So when I buy my condo, a share of that, let's call it 700 grand, goes to the city?
Could be. Another way, I guess, if, in a simpler sense, let's say it's all under one ownership.
Yeah.
And let's say it's a rental property.
Sure, yeah.
And the rental property, yeah. So in a rental property, maybe it's not sold until the whole building is sold, like 30 years later. But then 30 years later, it's got 30 years of appreciation that the city would not have been able to get if they had taken the money 30 years ago. Right.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, that was like just our way of trying to play within the rules of the capitalist market. But that's not the real solution in my mind.
Okay.
If you really wanted affordable housing in any city, what I think you would have to do is that you would have to allow one or multiple levels of government to build housing and provide it as a basic human right. And I'm not saying that it's the only kind of housing. You would still have private housing market, and what it would be is it would kind of be akin to healthcare. So in healthcare, and again, I'm not a healthcare professional, I'm an architect, so I'll have to cut me some slack on this one. But in healthcare, there's certain things that are basic human rights that you get for free. And if you want something special, like let's say you want cosmetic surgery, then you pay for it in a private market, right? And so in my model that I'm talking about, it's loosely based on the Vienna Model, is that the government would provide housing, and you would not own the housing. The government would own the housing, but you would sign an agreement which says that the government cannot kick you out. That you are not at risk of losing your home, the way that a developer can kind of kick you out, and that there are going to be minimum sizes and spaces, so that not only is it a minimum standard, but that there's also an opportunity for you to raise a family. It's kind of like the Vienna Model. In the Vienna Model, 60% of Viennese live in government subsidized housing and 40% don't. So you can imagine that is effectively like 60% of the housing is government housing, public housing, 40% of the housing is private housing. And just like in healthcare, or similar to healthcare, let's say in healthcare, government provides basic human rights, and if you want something special, cosmetic surgery maybe, then you got to go to the private market and get it, right? And so in my theoretical world of affordable housing, there would be a selection a competition of ideas, between the public market and the private market, where the public market offers basic human rights at an affordable rate, and they can make it affordable because they have scale and they have good interest rates and they have low cost land. They have less red tape, whereas the private market can build stuff that the government's not comfortable building.
Right.
They can build something really special and unique.
Less banks.
Yeah, exactly. That you might see that and say, well, I don't want the standard.
Yeah.
I want something more. And then you have to pay for it,
Sure.
as an investment, as a commodity, as opposed to just saying, I just need somewhere to live.
Yeah.
I need somewhere to live. I need it to be local to where I work. I need it to be near transit options. I don't want to pay out the nose for it because I want to invest in something else. I don't want to just invest in housing the way that you're kind of forced to in
Right.
Vancouver.
I like that. That's really interesting. It's some people talk about investor grade, and I'm thinking of that as the government standard. It's kind of what I live in Yaletown versus something in Cole Harbor that's maybe a little fancier and top notch and has those extra amenities.
And
it
could be in every neighborhood. I'm not talking about segregating neighborhoods.
Of course
this is a
not,
public neighborhood, and this is a private
but the
neighborhood.
buildings,
they would be on potentially individual properties. You could do mixed use.
Yeah.
There are examples of that already in Vancouver, where they're like Woodward's. To reference it again, they've got a public subsidized section and a private section. They do have some segregated amenities, which are a challenge, but it's a starting point, at least a reference point to build on.
Very cool. Well, that's a really interesting model, and I mean that's part of why I started this whole podcast, YouTube thing, was to have these kind of conversations and try to share ideas like that, because it's not something that I come across a lot in the day-to-day of being a realtor. So